Some villains get all the glory and also all the series. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Joker. While others are left to fight over scraps when it comes to just appearing as adversaries of A-list heroes. White Rabbit is Lorena Dodson, and while she might kinda seem like a joke villain, we've seen some pretty dark storylines featuring her in the past few years. White Rabbit is often out to prove that she's one of the baddest bads around and earn acclaim and recognition for her misdeeds. In the Absolute Carnage one-shot, Symbiote Spider-Man, we get to see White Rabbit featured in a much darker tale, when she runs into a judge who at one point came into contact with the Venom symbiote. In the flashback, we find out she ends up getting on his bad side, and in order to get back at him for what she believes was an unfair trial, she comes after him and his son, confronting them with a gun. It turns out the weapon is a joke gun, which actually shoots out just a little flag that says bang, but the shock of the whole event actually triggers a heart attack in the judge's son, Dan, who dies as a result. White Rabbit is arrested, but escapes out of her trial, being busted out by a large mech-like rabbit, very White Rabbit style. She torments the judge as she leaves, who attempts to break into the courtroom to kill her, but accidentally shoots an innocent court stenographer instead. Lorena might have shown remorse here, but instead she actually felt absolved of guilt by the judge's act, showing just how twisted and cold she can be, something that we don't always see a side of her, and I honestly feel like she can be pretty scary at times because of that. These are the kinds of stories I would love to see more of with White Rabbit. What do you think of White Rabbit? Would you like to see more just like intense stories with villains? I feel like we just sometimes don't get enough of those. I mean, sometimes we get too many. Once again, Joker, I'm looking at you. Amazo is no ordinary android. He possesses technology that allows him to replicate the abilities and powers of the superheroes that he battles. This gives him a significant advantage in combat, making him an opponent to be reckoned with, and that's not all. Amazo can even duplicate his opponent's weapons, making him an even more challenging adversary. This is a villain who can take on not just the powers of the Justice League, but who can also grapple, lasso, and fly majestically with a cape, I imagine, if he so chooses, with the best of them. The Flash, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern make up the roster that Amazo initially faced, and as such, these are usually the power sets that he possesses by default. But in general, Amazo is pretty amazing. Yeah, they don't do a lot with him, I feel like. This next one is honestly just so ridiculous. We're talking about Swarm, a ridiculous villain, but that doesn't mean that I of course don't want more of him in the comics. After all, he is ridiculous, and if you know me, if you've watched any videos that I have hosted, you know that I love ridiculous. Who is Swarm? He's a German World War II scientist who is made up of bees. Killer bees. He escaped after the war and had enough loot in his possession to basically fund his research on killer bees. What he likes to do, mad science stuff. That research led him to becoming devoured by a swarm of initially passive bees who were turned monstrous and then became basically uncontrollable. Trying to control them, and it backfired. However, his consciousness ended up merging with the bees as he was devoured, allowing him to basically live on in the swarm, which he often manipulates into a humanoid shape. Also, I gotta say, I was so excited when I was playing Marvel Strike Force when I got Swarm in my game. We're not sponsored, but I wish we were. Marvel Strike Force, hit us up, come on. This next villain is very obscure. We're talking about Baron Bug. Yeah, we got another bug villain for you if you like bug villains. I know I do. Baron Bug and his insect army. He first appeared in House of Mystery issue number 163 back in the 1960s. Here he was introduced as the wildest villain yet on the cover, and ended up going up against hero Robbie Reed, the original owner of the H-Dial, for those that didn't know. Despite the claim that he was the wildest villain, this wasn't enough to keep Baron Bug going in terms of his momentum, and he quickly fell into obscurity. He did resurface many years later in the 2000s in the 52 series and Doom Patrol, but still most people don't even know who he is, never mind the fact that he was once labeled as the wildest villain in all of DC Comics. A bold claim indeed. One of my favorite new villains from Spider-Man, this one actually comes to us from a not as well known Spider-Man title, or at least I don't think as many people know about it, Spine-Tingling Spider-Man. Now we're not talking about the physical comic series, which also is really great, but instead the digital only Infinity comic. If you aren't familiar with the Infinity comics, they are nice, light, short reads that are laid out more like kind of like a webtoon where you like scroll down vertically through them to the end. I personally love this format, it's so cool, and there's just so much alternate and interesting stuff that creatives can do with storytelling in this format. The Infinity comics are also only available through Marvel Unlimited, so if you want to check them out, get Marvel Unlimited and you can check them all out. Honestly, Marvel Unlimited is also great. Once again, not sponsored, but I wish we were, we should be, Marvel. In the Infinity comic by Saladin Ahmed, the villain in this story haunts Spider-Man with nightmares, keeping him awake and exhausted. Honestly, my biggest fear, I constantly feel like I'm overworking myself and I do not get enough sleep due to having some mild insomnia, I'd say, and I have a fear of dying from exhaustion as a result. Although, I hope I'm a long way away from that and I'm not that exhausted. In the end, we learn that this villain is known simply as the Sleep Stealer. Honestly, like I said, so scary. And they also have a haunting song, which you can find on Marvel's website that accompanies them as well, being played throughout the comic. I think it's also on YouTube too. Yeah, you should listen to it. It's creepy. Woo. From super creepy to super goofy, Calendar Man to most people is just a guy who is obsessed with the date. What a ridiculous villain. But in reality, he's also one of the most accomplished villains. During his first appearance, he almost managed to defeat Batman, one of the greatest and smartest detectives in the entire world, by giving him an almost unsolvable problem. That's right, he almost stumped Batman. Calendar Man sent an anonymous letter promising to commit 5 crimes, one each day, each one corresponding to a particular season in theme, with the 5th day also being a clue as to the true identity of Calendar Man with the 5th season. What is the 5th season? Batman failed to capture Calendar Man on the first 4 days, often arriving late to the scene of the crime. On the 5th day, it was only an ad for Calendar Man's side hustle as a magician, as he was playing for a suspicious amount of time coinciding with the crimes, 5 days at the Bijou Theater in Gotham, that allowed Batman to connect the dots. Where would Batman be without ads from the local newspaper? Where would any of us be without the local newspaper? Even Batman knows that local news is important. Also, I didn't say what the 5th season was, but you can guess what it is in the comments, and we'll also see how many of you are probably familiar with that story, because I know I could figure it out. When I got to that reveal, I was like, really? Oh, okay. Mr. Smile and Mr. Sulk both have too cool a design to not do more things in the comics. They make their first appearance back in Doctor Strange issue number 5 back in 2020, and only recently made another new appearance in Vengeance of the Moon Knight earlier this year in 2024, reminding me of how much I love them and think they deserve just more appearances. Hopefully, we won't have to wait another few years before we get another appearance of these two. You might think you know Polka Dot Man, but do you really know him? If you've seen James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, you are familiar with a version of Abner Krill, but the original Polka Dot Man, also Abner Krill, of the New Earth continuity, was a bit different when it came to his power set. Initially, when Polka Dot Man, or Mr. Polka Dot, first appeared, he came armed with multiple different weapons, which actually all came from the polka dots on his suit. He could basically pull them off his suit and then turn them into any means of different weapons and devices. Super cool. Even once turning one into a getaway vehicle. Yeah, an entire vehicle from one polka dot. This is the version of Polka Dot Man I'd be interested in seeing getting more love, especially if we got like a live action version of this version of Polka Dot Man, although I did enjoy the version that they included in the Suicide Squad, so you know, that was good too, but the polka dots were a little different. What's better than leaping somewhat high? Walking on stilts. That's the premise behind this strange Marvel supervillain. Wilbur Day is a scientist who began his life of crime after stealing a coworker's design and using it to build a pair of armored stilt legs. Granted, his entire body is covered in metallic armor as well, and it is pretty strong. He even smashed She-Hulk down through the street and into a subway tunnel one time during a fight. Pretty impressive. But tragically, being taller than other heroes does not mean you're automatically better than them in a fight. There's of course that whole knock the legs out from under them strategy, and of course his armor also apparently has weak spots which have been exposed in the comics before to just easily take him down. They're like, oh, a weak point, poke. He's done. Iron Man at one point even fought armor with armor by throwing one of Stilt Man's legs right back in his face after he detached them to jettison away and knock Stilt Man out as a result. Poor Stilt Man, he just can't catch a break. And finally, our last but certainly not our least villain, definitely our most villain, Silver Swan, has such a cool design that when I first saw her in modern day comics, I thought she was actually a new character. But it turns out no. She is a classic Wonder Woman villain. The fact that I didn't know this made me think that she just hasn't gotten enough love throughout her history. So I'm here to help remedy that fact by including her on this list and telling you about her in case you didn't know either. There have been a few different versions of Silver Swan over the years, but she is at her core originally an 80s character, making her first appearance in Wonder Woman issue number 288 back in 1981. In the modern day, she is Vanessa Capitelis, and her powers allow her to manipulate tiny nanite robots in her bloodstream. Move over, bloodstream. Bloodshot. Initially, the character was known for her flight abilities and sonic scream, and for those that love the classic version, do not worry, she still has both those powers in the modern day as well. That's about it. I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube. Bye!